Welcome to the At the Coalface podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. This podcast is all about what it's really like in the trenches of digital and e-commerce. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the pod. I have a treat for you today. I have Jono Alderson from a company that most of you will know the name of, from Yoast. Welcome, Jono.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It is an absolute privilege to be here. Looking forward to it.
Lovely to have you. You're in sunny Yorkshire, England, aren't you?
Sunny is debatable, but yeah, the rest's right.
Yeah, it's not sunny here either. We were talking off air that this year, for some reason, it's been probably definitely the wettest spring I can remember since I moved to New Zealand. It's been really wet this year, and summer has been very late in coming. So I'm hoping that the weather turns a corner soon and we can see some sunshine.
Yeah, though in fairness, I think there are times when days go by and I don't even look out the window, never mind go outside. So I have no idea what the weather's doing. I'm not missing out on anything though, apparently. It's more interesting.
From what you hear, you're not missing out on anything.
Yeah. We'll see.
Good stuff. Listen, it is super cool to have you along for the ride. There would be, I would say we would be hard pressed to find many people in our industry who have not heard of Yoast. And we'll get into what Yoast is, what it does, etc. shortly. But let's talk just briefly about you and your career. You've been at Yoast for just under 5 years now. You're the head of SEO at Yoast, and that'll become apparent just how important that is shortly. But you really, if I look back across the duration of your career, you've been involved pretty much in web from day one for the whole of your career.
Yeah, I was a bedroom web developer, age 13, teaching myself HTML with no knowledge or education in marketing, in business, in tech, just winging it. And I know there were a lot of people, it was the right place in the right time in the golden age. And I've just fallen on my feet a lot and been in the right place at the right time. I ended up in a digital marketing agency, building websites, fell into SEO, fell into kind of more strategic roles. And then, wound around a little bit, was involved in some MarTech, mastered Salesforce in a 6-month period of my life that I'll never get back and will hopefully never use again, and all sorts of odds and ends. And then, Yoast for almost 5 years now, which seems to have shot by, but also feels like a little bit like forever in a quite nice way. So all over the place, but I'm certainly a bit wed to this internet thing. It feels like
you've had a history in it, and that leads us to the Yoast piece. How did you end up falling into your role at Yoast? Was it a company you'd always wanted to work for, or did you know someone at the company, or how did you come to be at Yoast?
The very first kind of grown-up SEO conference that I spoke at was Search Love in London, I think in 2013 maybe, and a big part of my talk was performance optimization techniques for WordPress, super nerdy. And a big premise of it was a lot of people just install the Yoast SEO plugin, think they're done. And that's great because it gets them to 80%, but really if you want to compete actively and aggressively, you want to be getting to 90%, 95%, 100%. So I was a little bit anti, in my perception, of my experience. I thought actually the people who really get this and want to go for it really want to outgrow it and go past it and go beyond it and do their own thing. And that talk came to the attention of Joost de Valk, the founder of Yoast, and it created a friendship that spanned years. We ended up attending the same kind of conferences and events, got to know each other quite well. And meanwhile, I was getting increasingly disenfranchised with agency world. I worked for years in agencies, and I found I was really keen to be building something, to be extracting something and to be evolving it and giving back in a way that I just don't think agencies very well suited for. There's very little in agency world other than how do we survive this month and ship our deliverables to the client. And there were some interesting challenges, but really I was hankering to invest and grow in something. And then the timing was right. So I joined Yoast as head of special ops at the time, which was essentially come and craft your role, find some gaps, work out what we should be doing, do stuff that doesn't really fit into anyone else's role. So I was juggling research and development and product roadmap stuff. But then about a year and a half ago, Yoast sold to Newfold Digital, big hosting conglomerate, and the landscape changed a little bit. So I've stepped up into this head of SEO role, where essentially I own all things SEO at Yoast, which is an SEO company and plugin and platform. So I get involved in everything from what's our own SEO strategy to what is this product that we sell to what should we be building 5 years from now, and a whole bunch of conference and reading and writing and all sorts of odds and ends. And it's an adventure.
Very exciting times, and exciting times to be part of a company that is growing and is now part of a much bigger web enterprise company. And that's a great segue into what Yoast is, what it does, etc. And for anybody that's been in the web any length of time whatsoever, it will be, and certainly anybody who's had anything to do with WordPress for any length of time, I don't know too many WordPress websites on the internet that do not have the Yoast plugin installed. Would that be a fair assessment? I don't know if you guys know percentage-wise what percentage of WordPress sites on the internet you guys are installed on, but it must be a hell of a lot.
Yeah, the stats are crazy. It's the scale is crazy. It's quite hard to get stats. WordPress is very privacy friendly, not just as for the kind of end user, but also for us as plugin and web developers. It's quite hard to get specifics. We do know roughly. We know that we're running on somewhere around 14 million websites. We know that WordPress is 40-something% of the web, and we think that we're on maybe 15% of those sites. So it turns out to be maybe 5 or 6% of the web, maybe even more, which is pretty astounding. And when I'm sat there going, we should build this instead of that, the implications for the kind of the shape and the feel of the web as a whole are profound. So it's a pretty scary big stuff.
Now, what you guys do is really make SEO much more user friendly, so that you really don't need a developer. You don't really need necessarily an SEO specialist to be able to install and use your app. And you now have an app for Shopify as well that does similar things. Obviously started out in the WordPress world, now have glommed onto the Shopify world with its radical growth in e-com over the years. And then obviously by definition, because you're so heavily tied in with WordPress, you have a massive impact on the WooCommerce ecosystem as well. And so certainly really can't talk about SEO in the e-com and web space without thinking of or talking about Yoast.
Nice. No, and that's so amazing. And it's, yeah, the responsibility is huge as well. I think, especially having been acquired by a large hosting conglomerate, we're still trying very hard to say, actually, the mission is really important, which is democratize access to compete for everyone. Much in the same way that WordPress's broad mission is democratize publishing, we want to be trying to make sure that all those people have a level playing field when it comes to marketing in search. Like, I forget the stats off the top of my head, but some ridiculous proportion of all online purchase behavior and research behavior starts at or involves some kind of search by the user, whether that's Google or Bing or whatever. And making sure that every small business, every insurance firm, every baker, etc., can compete. Now, they can't all win, but we can definitely remove the barriers that might mean that it's technically hard for them to access those markets, and we can educate them and give them the tools to help them connect with the right consumer, improve their messaging, etc., and a whole bunch of other stuff. But the more we can do to enable everybody to get into that space, the better. So yeah, there's a real focus on the importance of that impact when you're talking about 14 million websites and giving them the tooling to remove all those barriers. Yeah, it's pretty big.
And there's this common meme, I guess, that we've probably all seen going around the internet. SEO is dead, long live SEO. And there's many jokes about SEO, but SEO is still mission critical to being found online, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the things we find is that a lot of those perceptions around, for example, technical SEO being less important than it was, or the importance of SEO being overrated, perhaps because you can just go in and write great content, actually is an accidental byproduct of us having done that democratization. Like WordPress still, frankly, out the box, isn't great for SEO, but we paper over a whole bunch of cracks, we reinforce it, we add a bunch of other stuff. And this perception that people have of SEO being dead and you just needing to write good content is because they're doing it on top of the framework and the fixes that we put in place, and not just in our own stuff, but in WordPress core, in the broader web, in open standards. So that's, yeah, it's interesting. It's hugely rewarding but frustrating to see this cycle of people saying, oh, it doesn't really matter, all you've got to do is write for your consumer. Yeah, but you still need your architecture to be set up correctly. You need your website to be found and understandable by search engines, not just Google. You need to integrate with Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter and everything else in a way that those things all interoperate. And then you need tools or the education or the framework to be able to create content in a way that it connects with the audience and convinces them to take action in the context when they're searching for something, which is very different from somebody who said, I am ready to purchase something. These are people who are problem solving, they're seeking information, they're not necessarily even problem aware. They might be just starting to explore problem spaces or symptoms, and the thinking you need to do in content you need to be crafting and the way you need to structure your website is very different in search than it is in other spaces. So yeah, taking all that away, then maybe SEO is dead. Maybe SEO is just good content marketing or good branding, but you still need the framework to do it.
Makes absolute sense. And for those that, for the three people out there who probably haven't heard of or used Yoast before. And frankly, it's been many years since I've touched a WordPress site, thankfully. And it's been many years since I've been exposed to the Yoast plugin. So maybe you can give us the state of the SEO nation as it relates to Yoast, as it relates to how Yoast actually works, what functionality it provides, how it helps you level up your SEO game within these platforms that are traditionally, and frankly, Shopify itself is pretty weak at SEO and the way it handles collections and URLs and lots of other things. And Shopify are, I guess, if you just take out of the box Shopify without Yoast, then certainly you are going to be limited in the things that you can do from an SEO perspective. And I know WordPress is much the same out of the box. As you rightly point out, it's almost a must-have thing if you want to do well from an SEO and a ranking perspective, and particularly if you're going to be trying to leverage your positioning in search engines for things like performance marketing and so many other things that tail off of SEO, and trying to better understand how people search for what you do online. Yoast feels like it becomes almost a mission critical part of that puzzle. So maybe you can go into a little bit of technical detail of what Yoast is, how it works, and how it benefits site owners.
Yeah, sure. No, that'd be super. Yeah, I'll focus on WordPress, but all of this is broadly applicable to Shopify, although that works in slightly different ways. So there's some slight differences, but the principles are the same. I think you can broadly simplify SEO into 3 pillars. You need your content to be, i.e., you need search engines to be able to find your stuff and to know where to find it, and to manage what they consume and what they don't consume. And then once you solve that, you need to facilitate indexing. So you need to help search engines understand how they categorize and evaluate your content. And then once all that's out of the way, you need to convince them to rank you, which involves proving that you have the right content for the right user, for a right keyword, and that your page is the best on the internet. So across those kinds of 3 pillars, we do a whole bunch of stuff. So as soon as you install Yoast SEO and turn it on, our principle is we don't want to get in your way. We want to do as much as possible behind the scenes to tick as many of those boxes as possible without giving you 100 controls and bells and whistles where you don't necessarily need to tinker, where we generally just align with best practice. So for example, we will do things like build XML sitemap, which will tell search engines where all of your content is, when it was last updated, and critically, it will exclude stuff that you said, I don't want this to be in the search results, which especially in WordPress is quite common. If I install a plugin to say manage events, I probably don't want loads of events that have expired to be A, found and indexed by search engines at the expense of my other pages, and B, I don't want them in my XML sitemap where I'm signposting Google continually saying, come take a look at this. So we do a whole bunch of heavy lifting behind the scenes on that to get that right. We also do a whole bunch of stuff on the page. So we output a ton of meta tags, we tweak what's already there, we add extra stuff to make sure that you're exposing the right structured data for Facebook, that your canonical URL tag is right so that search engines understand which page this is. We output meta descriptions and titles and all sorts. And then, so there's a whole bunch of the kind of technical stuff we tick in the box, but we tick the box for behind the scenes. I think the more interesting side then is, assuming that everybody gets that and it's a level playing field, the other half of the product is we offer essentially feedback mechanisms as you're writing and crafting your content for the SEO optimization of that content and for the readability of that content. And they're 2 subtly different groups of things. So the SEO side, we will say, hey, you've told us you want this page to rank for cute kittens, but actually you've not mentioned that a lot, and it looks like you're actually talking about cute puppies too much. Can we suggest that you rebalance that? And actually, it looks like you mention it a lot at the beginning, but you never mention it at the end and you go off topic. So there's a whole bunch of are you ticking all the boxes from an SEO optimization perspective in how and where and when you talk about your focus topics and keywords. And then the readability stuff's much more broad. It goes into areas like, this is a really long paragraph. You should probably break this up with some headers. And you're repeating yourself when you start a sentence, which isn't explicitly an SEO thing, but correlates very well with it, in so much as that when your content is more readable, it's easier for people to read, but also that's means that people are more likely to share, to comment, to link, to engage, and to do the kinds of secondary actions that mean that might then influence your rankings and drive you up because people are engaged, people are sharing and recommending, and so on. So those things play really nicely together, and we score all your content. We give recommendations on what the best and worst stuff is and tell you what to do next. I guess that's the surface level. Beneath that, there's a whole bunch of nerdy stuff we do with things like data and database tables and intelligently setting defaults when people really ought not to need to know what we're up to, but that gets a little bit into the weeds. But yeah, the show notes, we do automatic technical optimization and then a whole bunch of content guidelines.
This is such a critical thing because if I remember back in the very early days of my first forays into the internet and working agency side and working in digital marketing, one of the things that was so painful about SEO was the frequent algo updates with all the major search engines, of course, chief among them being Google. And I think what we have seen over the years, and correct me if I'm wrong, as the head of SEO for probably the single biggest SEO plugin in the world. You'll be much more up to speed with this than I ever could. But the reality is that algorithms are constantly changing. We do have these pretty big updates that can throw results into massive turmoil across specific verticals. And when Google catches SEO specialists gaming them in certain ways, then the next update will usually put the kibosh on that particular gaming. It feels like there is a constant game of cat and mouse between SEO specialists and the search engines to try to game them in every way possible. But it feels like search engines have largely gotten on top of those gaming efforts, and certainly the black hat and gray hat gaming efforts of SEO specialists around the world. And so how big, I guess my key question here is, how big of an impact are algorithm updates having these days in the world of SEO, and how much does it impact what you do and the changes you have to make to your plugin to keep it current and working well with the current version of a search engine algorithm?
Oh, interesting. This is a fascinating area, I think. So I guess there's two flavors of kind of algorithm updates. One is a couple of times a year, they will drop a bomb and the whole landscape will shift. And that happens rarely, but when it does, it's hugely impactful. And increasingly, those are powered by some kind of black box that even the internal Googlers don't understand. So sometimes there are unexpected winners and losers, and it's quite hard to understand precisely which metrics might have been affected and what levers you might have to affect those. We've broadly seen the death of SEO as a tactical thing over the last few years, as you hinted at. Like there's still a kind of seedy underground. There's still a whole bunch of black hat stuff going on. Whether or not that's effective or not is tenuous. But there is a kind of legacy of that old school where SEO is a game where you try and reverse engineer levers, you try and tweak and find tactics to chase the algorithm. That's largely gone away. So we do see a theme across these large algorithm updates where they're essentially just Google getting better at understanding whether a given web page is a good fit for a user that solves their problem. And it's big and it's complex and it's nuanced, but it essentially gets closer and closer to just this concept of quality. That's harder to cheat, it's harder to game. Like if your business is inauthentic, if your product isn't very good, if you have terrible reviews, if you're not employing genuine experts who understand the problem space, if you don't craft your content in a way that's easy to understand and helps people solve their problems without just selling, all of these kinds of things get in the way of you competing, because that's what Google's ultimately trying to understand. All of the analysis it does, all of the crunching, all of the crawling is to answer that one question of, if somebody searches for this key phrase, which is the best website, which helps them to solve their problem. And that's not the same as sells to them or has a pretty landing page or bids the highest on whatever metric. It's which is genuinely, authentically the most trustworthy expert resource web. So the big algorithm updates are really them getting much better at that in terms of step changes. And the sites we see losing are the ones who have invested a lot in scaled thin content. For example, we're going to write 1,000 pages about fluffy kittens, and we know that we've got the budget to do that, and each one of those will work a little bit, and at scale will win. That sort of stuff gets harder and harder, and the tactical stuff gets harder and harder. So that's one side. The other type of algorithm we see is multiple times per week, something minor will happen. There will be an addition to a certain standard or some tweaks and documentation or a footnote in a tweet somewhere saying we are now reinforcing this component or this consideration. And those things we definitely have to be on top of. So a big part of what we still do an update to the plugin every 2 weeks, which a lot of people grumble about. They say, oh, it's really frustrating to have to go in and update everything all the time. But that's the kind of cadence this ecosystem moves at. And you really want to be right at the cutting edge using whatever the latest standards are. So I remember about 2 weeks ago, unannounced, Google made some quite big changes to how they parsed data to do with product pricing, which is a whole rabbit hole. But they did this without any kind of an announcement, and immediately everybody started getting error and warning emails from Google Search Console, which is where you go and register your site if you want to monitor this type of stuff. So we had, metaphorically, the phones ringing off the hook saying there's all these problems. And then 2 or 3 hours later, we changed how our structured data works to be in alignment with the new standard. We had a patch out, I think, the next day, and suddenly everything's okay again. And that sort of thing happens all the time. Thankfully, most of the time, it's not quite so visible. It doesn't throw quite as many errors all over the place when stuff changes. But we're constantly making sure that we're tweaking standards. We're adding new bits. We're taking things away. We're adding support for new and emerging standards. This is like, there's so much stuff happening in this space. And a big part of the job is making sure we don't miss any of that. So yeah, it's super exciting.
And one of the things that I guess has always been largely a part of the rumor mill in the SEO ecosystem is this feeling and this sense, and perhaps even elements of empirical data to say that Google does favor brands and pages and websites and domains that advertise with them through Google Ads. And certainly back in the very, very early days of me having my own e-commerce pure play, maybe it was my imagination, but certainly I seemed to do better from an SEO perspective when I was advertising with Google than when I wasn't. Now, in theory, that's illegal, and in theory, that doesn't happen, and in theory, Google doesn't do that, and you may not have any insider knowledge there. But these rumors have been pretty persistent for as long as I can remember across the web, that Google definitely favors, from an SEO perspective, where people are advertising with them as well. And I just wonder if that's more about those pages or those domains coming onto Google's radar sooner, because typically when a site first launches, the first thing they do is run Google ads because they're not getting any organic traffic. And so does this simply put those pages on Google's radar sooner, faster? Does it crawl them more frequently because it has to for ads? What is this story about the impact on running Google ads versus your organic SEO or search engine optimization ranking, your search ranking? What do you think the interplay is between paid search and organic search and the resultant rankings associated with that?
So I think there is an interplay, but I'll shoot down the conspiracy theory first, because one of the privileges of working at Yoast is that our scale means that we shift the balance of the relationship a little bit with Google. So where most SEOs are in a kind of tense, almost combative relationship with Google, it's us versus them, we work quite closely with them across a whole bunch of different teams. And I cannot tell you how frustrating it is that the number of times per week that we'll be on a call or an email thread with X team from Google, introducing them to different teams in Google who are working on the same stuff. There is absolutely no chance that there is some grand conspiracy that the paid team or the paid systems are leaking stuff across the organic systems, because none of these people have ever met, never mind they're collabing on some kind of evil scheme. It's really frustrating that they do have such a strong separation between church and state. Makes it quite hard to imagine. In a perfect world, I think there would be more union and more unity between the worlds of paid and organic. There's certainly, you could create phenomenal landing pages and do great research, etc. They have none of that because they're not allowed to, and they separate it quite religiously. So unfortunately not. However, I think there is some correlation and there are some effects. So you mentioned the discovery angle. I think that's interesting, that, yeah, if I start advertising my site and it's turning up in search engines, search engine results pages are pages that bizarrely get crawled by other search engines, that their results then get crawled by Google. So there's a kind of circular effect where just advertising might mean that you get your page onto the radar. But also more broadly, I think if you've got a paid advert and an organic result, that's more brand recognition. It's potentially more trust. It's potentially two different sets of messaging, one of which might be compelling when the other one wasn't. It's more brand recall when people maybe search again on another device or another screen or another day. All of those things might mean that you then get the click, whereas you might not otherwise. And that might then in turn affect things. So speculatively, it is broadly agreed that Google uses some form of user engagement metrics and tracking to influence where a site ranks. I think that's less blunt than click-through rate, but certainly that might be part of it. And we see things like, did this person open this page and then bounce back to the search results quickly? We see those kinds of things affecting it. The presence of paid and organic ads affecting when and how people click into results might then affect the organic results in turn. So yeah, I think there might be some interplay, but it's not some kind of evil data sharing behind the scenes.
So it's not an overt interplay. There's probably some natural data sharing across systems and technologies as they crawl the web, and certainly other search engines ranking and linking back to Google. So yeah, you've put that conspiracy to bed. Now, another sort of conspiracy, if you want to call it that came out a number of years ago now, I think it's about 10 years ago now, when Google basically hid a whole bunch of keywords behind not set for anybody that was authenticated into Google for privacy reasons, ostensibly for privacy reasons. So you couldn't actually see the performance of specific keywords on your site in analytics and Search Console, etc. And so therefore, what keywords were performing well and driving the vast majority of your traffic, unless you were running paid advertising. And this was, I guess, where the conspiracy sprung from, that your data was much, much more limited from an organic perspective than it was from a paid perspective, where you can still access all of that data from a keyword and ad performance perspective. And for optimization purposes, you could no longer really use a tremendous amount of that data for organic optimization. And there was this thinking that Google did this on purpose, that the whole idea behind this was so that you couldn't as easily optimize your organic ranking. So therefore, you would by default do a whole lot more paid advertising, if for no other reason than to capture data that you now have lost. So what is your thinking around how Google has gone down this path? And then we'll follow up with another question that I have around GA4 and GTM and a few other things. But maybe you can speak first to data around keyword performance and the obfuscation of keyword performance, particularly as it relates to Google, versus the data that you can get through paid search.
Sure. So this is super frustrating. It remains super frustrating. And I see paid search going the same way. So one of the things that Google is particularly bad at is product launches and storytelling around that kind of thing. And the way they handled the announcement on the removal of the keyword data was really bad. So initially, yeah, they said it was a privacy thing, and they cited as an example of something like a vulnerable person had searched some keywords and it had ended up in their browser history, and it had gone through to Google Analytics, and that enabled them to be targeted in a way that exposed them and was risky, etc., etc. I maybe buy that to a degree, but then you say, okay, but tools like incognito browsing and other systems and ad blockers exist, and that kind of minimizes that surface area. So theoretically, maybe, but that's super vague. But then, so the SEO industry were pretty outraged by how crude this was, and there was a whole bunch of pushback. And then they came back with another argument, which was that it was for technical reasons, that it was because they were handing off a click from an HTTP request to an HTTPS request, which at the time was relatively new and not very common. The referrer data was going to be lost, and they hid behind this argument for a while, even though it was fairly obviously nonsense. And then we essentially all got bored of asking them because they wouldn't answer us and gave up. And to this day, we don't get this data. Now, that did make it much harder to optimize on a keyword level for sure. It changed the game to being purely page level. And you do get some of this data in Google Search Console, but it's full of holes. It's rounded to big numbers. It omits anything that's particularly long tail or low search volume, which might well be where your opportunity is. It's really hard to filter and explore in that interface, and it doesn't tie together nicely with your Google Analytics data. So one of the things we obviously really want is to say, this keyword drove me that many clicks and gave me that many sales. And it just breaks that relationship right in the middle in a way that means you can never get that back. There are some tools that try and reverse engineer it from the Search Console data, but they do a bad job of just guesstimating based on overall volumes. So you're probably better off without. So it really got us stuck in this page level world where all we can really do is optimize pages for rankings and then hope that the traffic that's getting driven is converting because it's on topic and it matches the landing page copy and the messaging and so on. Now, funny you should mention GA4, because I suspect that one of the reasons that this happened was somebody saw the writing on the wall when it came to the kind of grand privacy revolution that we're going through, and in particular, a lot of the challenges with data transfer from Europe to America, which wasn't really on anyone's mind at the time, but certainly is now. And one of the things we see across all sorts of bits of Google is them tidying up loose ends of open-ended data collection. So I clocked this a few months ago when I'm a big Google Assistant user. I have a bunch of Google devices around my house, and I use voice search quite a lot. And I had quite a sophisticated integration between my Google setup, if this, then that, and Trello, which I used for my to-do lists. And I used to say to Google, hey, add this task to my Trello list, where I would use an open phrase, and it would push it all through. They've recently shut down all the API endpoints for that, because they can't trust that data isn't sensitive and they can't manage the transfer and the storage of it, which is exactly why they're shutting down Universal Analytics and moving to GA4. It's exactly why they're rescinding a whole bunch of their low search volume data in AdWords. I think they are really scared of providing people with any data that might enable you to drill down to an individual user and thus expose them for a whole bunch of privacy and data storage issues. It's a huge challenge. They've got to reinvent all of their architecture and all of their products to protect users at that kind of long tail level in a way that they've never really had to. And I think that the keyword not provided might just have been an early version of that. Maybe it's my conspiracy theory.
And the ostensible death of third-party cookies, which has been talked about and pushed back and pushed back and been pushed back again, and who knows how many times it'll be pushed back because they can't get Flock to work and whatever other replacements they've been working on for years and years. They haven't seemed to been able to get that to work. But it seems to me, as someone who's been working in the space for a very long time, that GA, GTM, all of the cookie-related technology, everything is becoming kind of dev-only. And it feels, if I was to say that there was any kind of grand conspiracy linking all these together, it would be that Google wants you to just trust them and run ads. That would be, if I took the sum total of directionally where it feels like Google is taking the web. When you look at the complexity of GA4 and the lack of e-commerce tracking, there's nothing remotely in GA4 that gets us to where UA is in relation to e-commerce tracking. Their GTM is becoming much more locked down, much more complex. It is not user-friendly. You pretty much require a developer to get anything done from a data layer perspective. When we look at the death of third-party cookies, taken in aggregate, it would seem that Google is simply messaging to the market, we do not want to make this easy for you anymore. We expect you to trust us, and we expect you to leverage Google Ads if you want to make sales as an e-commerce business. Now, again, this all may sound like a conspiracy theory, but certainly taken in aggregate, that feels directionally where Google is pushing the world, is we want to further entrench our monopoly on advertising on the web, and we want to do that by ensuring that we take away chip by chip, piece by piece, all of the tools that you need to be able to do business outside of paid ads through Google.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think there are some parts of Google that definitely think like that. The one big thing I've learned about Google with this kind of privileged position, see behind the curtain, is I continually have to retrain myself to think there is no such company as Google. There are just lots of small teams working on disparate projects that may or may not align or pull in different directions or complete or conflict entirely. And the more I see of Google, the more this just seems to be the way they operate. They sponsor project teams and they say, go run away and do the thing. And they don't really think about how to make that cohesive. So I think there are some emergent behaviors of that because they also happen to run, a big ads product and platform. So I think GA4 doesn't feel like a masked conspiracy to try and get us all to use ads. It just feels like a bad product that's not been very well designed. I know a whole bunch of the people working on it left halfway through designing it, a bunch of the product managers, and what's left isn't very good. And they are on a really strict timetable to get in before the death of third-party cookies, and also to cover themselves for all the data transfer stuff that they really can't work around with GA3. Also, hilariously, GA4's machine learning modeling system, of course, it is going to say spend on ads because it's going to be biased towards last click attribution. It's going to be running on sites that are already struggling to do good organic marketing. It's going to say the things that work are spending money. Wherever you're spending money with Google Ads, spend more money there. So that's frustrating. However, the flip side of this is I do see lots of teams at Google working on stuff that is focusing on promoting and growing and strengthening the open web and the organic web. And the narrative there is that those teams, at least, their narrative is that Google as a whole is reliant and always will be on people being motivated and incentivized to publish content, to have websites, and to compete organically. Because if you just make it pay to play, people will inevitably say, you know what, I will just have a Facebook page, or I will only market locally via a WhatsApp group, or whatever tomorrow's platform is. Google, in order to remain healthy, Google has to be an ecosystem where people can go, it's super easy to publish a website. It's super easy to put my content and my business online, and I can get visitors and sales or whatever without having to pay through the nose for ads for it. So there are parts of Google that are definitely pushing in the right direction. I think the new dynamic that's making this really interesting, I don't know how much this is public, but we're talking to a bunch of people from Google about Merchant Center, which is there if you run an e-commerce store, you create your account there, you upload your products, or you create some kind of feed from your website to populate it, and all of your products turn up in Google Shopping. What's changed
Yes.
recently is that's all turning up directly in the main search results as in organic formats. So if I'm searching for, I don't know, a t-shirt or a washing machine, increasing amounts of those results are from Google's Merchant Center infrastructure. And what they're working on at the moment is saying, how do we crawl the open web, crawl organically, look at sites and take the structured data from those sites, extract that and use it as a primary source of truth about their products, their inventory, their pricing, and serve that in the organic results. And they're looking at how do we evolve Google's organic listings to be more competitive against paid space. How do we compete with Amazon? How do we help people find products more easily? So there's all sorts of really interesting initiatives to say, how do we make it easier and more impactful to compete organically? But yeah, at the same time, GA4 is definitely going to push a whole bunch of people to just spending on ads, because there's no way they can use it to build business cases and evaluate their performance and see how their content's doing. Damn, it's hard enough even to see where does traffic come into my site, never mind what's the ROI of my content marketing strategy. So yeah, I think it's going to be really messy.
And when we think about the tracking technologies across the web that have traditionally used JavaScript tags and various cookie mechanisms, etc., and now moving to more JavaScript-driven technologies, and of course, many browsers block JavaScript, or it's easy for users to turn it off, but then they pretty much hobble the entire internet because so much of the internet uses JavaScript to do every single function, not just SEO functions, not attribution functions, etc. You can't really turn off JavaScript if you want to use the modern web in a modern browser. So it feels like a lot of these attribution technologies are going down the track of using some sort of JavaScript technology to give us the data that we'll be losing via cookies and we'll be losing via Google Analytics. And what do you think? If I realize this is an evolving field, I realize this is an evolving, even Google's position on this is evolving seemingly daily. They have delayed the death of Universal Analytics for their G360 users. And I suspect that they may ultimately delay the death of Universal Analytics for all users, even the free analytics. I suspect, given Google's track record of delaying what they call line in the sand dates, don't seem to be lines in the sand eventually, because things always end up taking Google longer to develop replacements for than they ever think it will. And so it feels like that's where they're caught on this treadmill of, we want to force the web down this path. Legislators are for pushing the web down a certain path. But the funny thing is that oftentimes this legislation was pushed by Google in the first place. So they're their own worst enemy in many respects from a privacy perspective, because they have single sign-on technology that half the bloody internet uses. They've got a whole lot of first-party data that no one else has. So frankly, any quote privacy moves, which feel like a red herring to me anyway, because I actually, my position is people don't give a shit about privacy. If they did, then they wouldn't be carrying around a tracking device in their pocket everywhere they go. But quite aside from that, I think that Google has somewhat shot itself in the foot from a timing perspective, because they just don't have reasonable replacement technologies available that align with the dates of terminating their old technology first.
No, not at all. I can't remember the name of it, but I was digging through. So what was the standard you mentioned earlier? I forget the name, that's meant to replace third-party cookies.
Flock.
Yeah, so Flock died. Flock died very quickly. And the new thing they're working on, the name of which I forget as well, I'm useless, aren't I? I was digging through the spec, which is still, I would say, about 20% written in a GitHub repository somewhere. And it is so full of holes, it is shocking. And they were already, this is the new standard that we're going to use to replace third-party cookies next year, etc. It is so embarrassingly thin. And I dug through it because I thought, initially, this looks like quite a good idea. Maybe I can contribute and close some of those gaps, but it is comprehensively and fundamentally flawed. And it's all based on attributing tags to domains. So they have some kind of seed set, and they say that eBay is about used products. They say that Wayfair is about furniture, etc. And from that, they can extrapolate and do machine learning on what is this website about. And you can have some kind of negotiation between a user's preference profile and what a website is about. But there's real fundamental gaps in it, like they're not quite sure yet whether a website ought to be able to declare its topics or whether it should just be purely inferred. And also, it only operates at domain level. So what happens to sites that do 20 different things or have 20 different subdomains? Like, the whole thing is technically and conceptually flawed. So they have no viable plans to fill any of these gaps. So there's either those dates are going to have to shift, or the whole advertising stack of the web just fails when we get to July or whenever it is now. It's pretty shammy. I guess they're gambling on all this just goes away, right? They can leverage enough of their negotiating power in Congress and wherever else. And I see there are some positive steps in some directions, but I think their strategy is probably just hope at this stage.
And what do you think? I have always thought that the GDPR compliant and other, because obviously every country and sometimes even smaller regions have their own kind of version of GDPR, and the world is becoming more aligned around what privacy needs to look like more universally. But it has always struck me that those cookie messages at the bottom of websites were a complete waste of time, that they actually just destroy the user experience. I don't know anyone. I literally am not aware of anyone who ever clicks no, who exits a site because, oh God, they're using cookies. Everybody knows that everything they're doing on the web is getting tracked in some way or another. So really all it is a destroyer of UX. Now, when we think about these privacy moves, what do you think is going to happen in regards to will we move to a world where something like a first-party cookie exchange system will have to be erected by private businesses or a nonprofit organization or something like that? If third-party cookies die and businesses and Google themselves don't have a viable alternative, and really we need the internet to continue to work, we've got all these different attribution technologies. We've got Triple Whale, we've got Northbeam, we've got this entire cottage industry trying to understand attribution, trying to understand marketing. We've got the M4 team doing all sorts of new technologies that in theory able to replace cookies, but really we do not have a replacement for cookies. Let's just call a spade a spade. We do not have a replacement for third-party cookies as of today.
No.
So if these privacy moves continue the way that it's looking like they're headed down, now I know this gets a little bit outside SEO, but it is very related. It is very tightly coupled with the concept of SEO and being able to optimize your website, being able to optimize content on your domains, subdomains, etc., to be able to rank organically well on the web so that you don't have to pay for 100% of the traffic that comes to your website, because in an alternate world, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to pay for 100% of the traffic that comes to your site. And most businesses simply would not be able to afford that. And so lots of businesses would simply go out on the internet. And that's no good. So do you see a world where most businesses ultimately are forced into a position of a first-party cookie or data exchange of some variety, where if they get permission from their users, i.e. via a cookie authorization or something like that, where now we don't have third-party cookies anymore, but we effectively treat first-party cookies like third-party cookies, because we now have got this universal data exchange across the internet that everybody opts into.
Yeah, and you know what that looks like? It looks like Google single sign-on or Facebook single sign-on, because the only way you can do that at that scale is to tie it to services people already use, or put a whole bunch of money behind something that's ostensibly neutral and new. Really, where's that money come from? So there's two versions of this story. That's one where you essentially get a federated web where every website has to power all of its login and authentication and permission systems via something like OAuth, via one of the existing giants, which has pros and cons, but it bypasses the whole problem and just creates another form of cookie banner, which everyone will just accept, and you'll be opting into a Google sign-in rather than the local cookies, which pointless waste of everyone's time and money, and makes the situation much worse, because you're then opting out of any privacy. You're saying, yeah, put me in this massive conglomerate pool of shared data, etc. That's a bit scary. One of the alternatives that might have happened was there was a spec in the HTML standards for domains being able to declare other domains owned by the same business so that you could share first-party cookies between them. So obviously the constraint of first-party cookies is this domain and this domain only, but in the real world, businesses might have three different. You might have Microsoft.com, Microsoft.net, blog.microsoft.org. All of these are the same entity. It just so happens that somebody in their IT department set them up on different host names and different domains. It's not a reflection of any kind of strategic or real world differentiation. So the principle of the spec was to be able to say, if somebody signs into this one, let's consider them as signed into all of them. Let's share the credentials. Let's treat that like a first-party cookie. I think it was one of Google pushing for it, and I think it was Mozilla shot it down in flames, because it could have been used to create exactly this kind of mess, exactly the kind of, oh, let's just treat all of these sites as one big pool where they all give each other permission and we share the user data, and we actually make the privacy a lot worse. So we end up with the same kind of problem we have with GA, is all of this is going away, and the only potential specifications we have for how this might be fixed either make it worse or are just complete nonsense and vaporware and hope. So yeah, you say this isn't really core SEO, but we're in a position where the fundamental shape and nature and flavor of the web might change or break overnight, which will definitely impact business models, will definitely impact people's motivation to produce content. It will change how individual consumers browse and research. I don't know, maybe we end up with a microtransaction model where every time you want to visit a web page, you pay 0.00 whatever. That's going to make me a lot more thoughtful about how I browse. All of this could change overnight. And that definitely impacts what should my SEO strategy be? What does SEO even mean in that context? Who knows? Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about this sort of thing too.
And certainly that would affect Yoast, because if SEO no longer matters anymore in this brave new world of whatever it ends up, this dystopian world, actually, in some respects, if SEO no longer matters, then, Yoast would have to make a pretty hard pivot.
Yeah, I think our readability and content stuff still would stand on its own. If you're fighting even harder for consumers, you want to make sure that you're not accidentally confusing or annoying or compounding them. But yeah, the core SEO stuff, we definitely struggle with. I think in parallel to this, there is some interesting progressive stuff happening. So we definitely see more evolution of Google relying on schema.org and structured data for kind of explicitly feeding them information about your business and your products and stuff, which might well survive the death of the open web as we know it. They would still want to be ingesting stuff like what's your product's stock status and what's the name, what's this company's logo and that sort of information. So maybe we end up, there's definitely a version of this narrative where the web and websites as we know it become more like databases that feed Google or Facebook's inventory of content. And then it's just a kind of different flavor of SEO, right? You've still got people who have problems and needs, and they do some form of search for it. And then you have a system that's determining what do we show them, and you want to influence that to benefit yourself. It's not SEO as we know it, but it's still going to rely on have I structured my content, have I told the right stories, have I understood my audience, and so on. So yeah, I think there's still a role for us there, but it's definitely not the same one that we have today.
Wow, Jono, you are a wealth of information. You work for probably the most influential SEO-related plugin / technology / platform in the world. You're an absolute wealth of knowledge. Now, what's beautiful about Yoast is that as far as I recall, I could be wrong on this, and maybe you've changed your plans around this, but basic Yoast is free to use, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the principle is, again, on rising and second level playing field, everybody should be able to get those tools for free. So the free product gives you everything you need to solve those problems of how do I get all the technical stuff right out the box? How do I control the narrative I'm sending to Google? And how do I manage all my content and help learn from it? So if you don't have the budget to invest in SEO, but you still want to compete, then yeah, that will give you everything you need. Where the premium stuff comes in, there's two flavors. One is the premium product gives you more stuff. It gives you stuff which lets you be smarter or lets you be faster. So more sophisticated types of analysis, automation workflows, more tailored recommendations, etc. on top of that free stuff. And then alongside that, we have a couple of tailored products for specific verticals. So we have a WooCommerce integration that dials up all the e-commerce side. We have a news integration, which is also good for Google Discover, which is increasingly a big deal. A local one, if you're running local businesses, which does a whole bunch of stuff with addresses. And then a video one that does much more sophisticated video, structured data, and integrates much more nicely with things like Vimeo and YouTube. Yeah, and the free one is definitely free, and it is everything you need if you just want to kind of get into position. But if you really want to compete, it's worth investing a little bit of money to unlock the power tools.
Yeah, I see it here on your pricing page. You've got free, and look, it does include all the foundational stuff for SEO. Then you've got your $99 annual fee product, and you've got $229 annual USD fee product. And it's pretty clear what the additional features and functions there are listed. So I guess if someone wants to find out more about Yoast, what you guys do, how you guys do it, what value you bring to particularly WordPress, WooCommerce, and Shopify, are they best to simply go to yoast.com, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, YOAST.com. And if you go to the plugins pricing page right from the top of the page there, you can go to the pricing page and it will tell you everything that the free and the 2 subscription versions come with. Is that the best place for people to find out about Yoast, and how would they basically get a hold of you? Or is this the kind of thing that basically you would point people typically in the first instance directly to the Yoast homepage?
Going to the Yoast homepage makes sense. And if you're already on WordPress or Shopify, install the thing and play with it. I should plug the Yoast SEO Academy as well, which if you've got to that kind of first step and have got the free thing, we have a whole bunch of courses and learning materials, some of which are specifically how do you use this plugin, and some are broader SEO education. And then there's a whole bunch of premium courses that come with a premium sign up as well on things like technical SEO, internationalization, where you really want to learn enough to fuel your own SEO strategies and so on. So that's a good place to start. For finding me, yoast.com or Twitter. I'm a bit of a Twitter person, but we'll see if that remains the case as it increasingly becomes a flaming hellscape. A wonderful utopia, who knows at this stage, but it seemed more like the former, right? Yeah, yoast.com is a good starting place. Twitter for me for now.
Sounds great. Now, this is a place where I would normally get into what's on your roadmap, what's planned for Yoast moving forward, but you've done a pretty good job of telling us you deal with these constant updates by the search engines on a rolling basis. You deal with major updates as they come. You roll all the new features and functions into the platform at all times, and you really are at the bleeding edge of SEO and everything search engine related. So you've done a really good job being clear about that, but we are at the point of the podcast where I turn the microphone over to you. I let you ask me one question, any question you like. Doesn't have to be business related, but it certainly can be. So over to you, Jono Alderson from Yoast. Thank you so much for your time. What's your question for me?
Oh, thank you. If you had a useless superpower, what would it be? I think mine is always knowing the Wi-Fi password. Quite like that.
Yeah, look, it's funny because I had someone else ask me this, so I won't give the
Oh,
answer.
no.
No, it's fine. They asked it in a slightly different way, but it ultimately ended up being a very similar thing. So very good question. Very good question. I at that time, I said that I would like to effectively be a Wi-Fi antenna so that I didn't need to, because I live in a tiny home at the moment. We're moving to Mexico next year, but I live in a tiny home. Internet connectivity here is not great. And it's because we live in a bit of a dead spot for Wi-Fi around here. And so I thought I'd love to be able to effectively be an antenna to where I could get Wi-Fi wherever I want. It looks like Elon Musk is fixing that with Starlink anyway, so I don't need that superpower anymore. And then one of the other things that the person who asked me the question said, one of the answers they had heard was, one guy said, I would like to have a detachable arm so that when I'm sleeping in bed with my wife and we want to cuddle, I have a place to put the arm, the arm that would normally go underneath her or above my head. I could just remove that arm for the purposes of sleeping together comfortably, which I thought was super cool. Look, that is an absolutely awesome question. I think if I had a superpower, I'm a big fan of flight. I really am. I always have been. I used to competitively fly radio-controlled helicopters, so I would love to be able to fly. I've actually had many dreams where I could fly, and or float is probably a better term, and I could just at will go wherever I wanted by floating there, and that to me would be a super cool superpower. So that would be the one I would pick.
Oh, so disappointing when you wake up though, right?
Exactly, because it feels so incredibly real. I'm a very lucid dreamer, and my dreams are super hyper realistic. And you wake up and you go, "Was that?" I oftentimes wake up and I go, "Was that real or was that not real?" And then you come to your senses and you realize, no, that was just a dream. And yeah, flying I think would be super super cool. I'm very envious of.
Yep, many reasons to be envious of birds, I reckon. Perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've got it down,
Jono,
they have a great time.
Absolutely. Listen, Jono, it has been spectacular having you on the pod. Wish you and Yoast every success, every continued success. You guys are the foundation of so many websites and their success on the internet. So thank you for doing what you do. And hopefully we can get you back on in another 6, 12, 18 months and see where this train wreck of the internet is headed as it relates to privacy, cookies, and all the rest. So thank you so much for your time. Look forward to having you on again soon.
No, thank you. That was a treat. Look forward to it.
Are you a merchant or software vendor that is focused on e-commerce or omnichannel? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to see how we can help you scale your business.